Oh, this is so good. Today we're taking on an epic album that we've never covered before here. And with it, a formidable song that is as darkly beautiful as they come. This Dog Eat Dog track was written by one of the premier lyrical geniuses of the past half century. And it boasts a brooding, black-hearted view of the world. Sound pretty bleak? I'm telling you, when paired with the sonic excellence of his guitar hero bandmate, this track becomes a rarified work of art. But this genius, he started exerting major control on this record, and it led to the beginning of the end for this band. I'm telling you, we got no shortage of drama on this one. It's an episode you're not going to want to miss, coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever tried the experiment of syncing The Wizard of Oz with Dark Side of the Moon, you're going to dig this channel of pure musical nostalgia. Everybody's tried it, come on. Make sure to subscribe below right now, click the bell so that you always know when our interviews and our shows come out. Also, check out our Patreon. We have an additional catalog of exclusive content there. You can even become an honorary producer. That helps us to keep it a daily channel. It is a self-funded channel and it helps us a lot. So today we're coming back to a top-tier band, one of my favorites ever, a combination of four almost mythical musicians who changed the way we listen to music forever back in the 70s. Talking about David Gilmour, Roger Waters, Nick Mason, and Rick Wright, collectively known as Pink Floyd. Although in the past we've broken down songs from most of their biggest albums, you know, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall.
Money, how I wish you were here. Teacher, leave them kids alone.
We have yet to take a deep dive into their 1977 masterpiece, Animals, one of my favorites. So we're going to change that today. And to kick things off, we're going to go with the track that eats up almost all of side one. I'm talking about Dogs. Now, as Pink Floyd progressed through the 70s, you know, moving further away from the collaborative effort of Dark Side of the Moon, Roger Waters' stranglehold over the band began to tighten. Such was the strength of his lyrical and conceptual genius. I mean, say what you will about Roger Waters, the man, but Pink Floyd would have never achieved all they did without him. But then again, you can say the same thing about David Gilmour. I mean, his sonic brilliance is in a class all its own. As every Pink Floyd fan knows, these two giants of rock are indisputably indispensable to this band's legacy. I just want to put it out there as we get into this because honestly, there's some kind of hard things to sift through on this one. So Roger Waters, judging by the concept albums he has spearheaded, he has an insane talent for giving life to the twisted concepts churning in his head, let's just say. A poet of the darkest order, his lyrical prowess towered above his bandmates' skills with the written word for sure. And that's where today's drama-filled narrative kicks into high gear. By the time Waters got to work writing 1977's Animals, he was making a distinct transition from writing lyrics that could be somewhat vague to addressing very precise and specific themes. He even said it himself. He said, I was trying to push the band into more specific areas of subject matter, always trying to be more direct. And Animals would be direct to say the least. Direct in its violence, in its pessimistic appraisal of the human condition, for sure. But we'll get to that in just a minute. So the origins of Animals, actually, they go back to 1974, even before the composition of Pink Floyd's previous studio album, Wish You Were Here. During the creation of that record, there were two key songs that didn't make the final cut, so to speak. You Gotta Be Crazy and Raving and Drooling. Both lengthy tracks that were already part of Floyd's concert set list, so they were familiar territory to the band and to some fans. Raving and Drooling was a vague tale, maybe about insanity, and You Gotta Be Crazy described the playbook of a heartless businessman. Although both were considered for the album, Roger Waters asserted that neither were relevant to Wish You Were Here's conceptual message, and both were dropped from the running for the album. But Waters would later revisit them in 1976, during the recording sessions for Animals, to be precise. And this time, they fit perfectly into a new concept that he was developing. So You Gotta Be Crazy and Raving and Drooling were each refitted as entries into his emerging Animals concept. Raving and Drooling became Sheep, and You Gotta Be Crazy became Dogs. This new album, this new concept, it examined society through the lens of three different animals: pigs, dogs, and sheep, each symbolic of a separate social class. Of course, loosely based on George Orwell's grim political tale, Animal Farm. In Animals, though, these three species are locked into a violent and vicious cycle of oppression and revolution. The pigs embody a corrupt ruling class. These despotic leaders, motivated by greed and power, they rule from high-standing positions and impose their worldview on, the other animals. The dogs, savage and predatory, they symbolize the social climbing middle class. They aspire to be pigs, clawing their way into positions of power. They're deceitful and heartless and really will do whatever it takes to get ahead. And then lastly, there is the vast herd, the sheep, a countless body of mindless and unquestioning masses that don't think twice about obeying the other animals. These passive followers, they represent the common man, and they're easily exploited by the cunning of the dogs and the pigs. I mean, it's a pretty bleak view and a dark take on humanity for sure. Decades later, Waters would call it sort of a cartoon sketch of how he saw the way society was organized. But if you've ever read Animal Farm in English class, which most of you have, you already know that Pink Floyd's Animals is not a straight-up adaptation of the book. Rather, it's more like a frame of reference, a launching point into Waters' own alternative animal-inspired reality. While Orwell's pull-no-punches satire delivers a hard-hitting critique of Joseph Stalin's regime, Roger Waters' Animals takes aim at capitalism, which he held responsible for society's woes. In Waters' narrative, the sheep ultimately rise up to conquer their oppressors. So does that count as a happy ending? Well, to be honest, there's not much happiness to go around. But said Roger about it, sometime during the middle of recording it, it seemed like the right thing to do to tie it all together. He'd go on to say, even though Waters was completely committed to the album's brutal messaging, the rest of the band, they weren't completely sold on it. For example, David Gilmour said of his bandmate's Ironclad View, "Animals I could see the truth of, though I don't paint people as black as that." I'm going to have to back David Gilmour up on this one. Now, to achieve his animal concept, Waters divided the album into 5 tracks. There's Pigs on the Wing Part 1. Occasionally glancing up through the rain. Dogs. Looking over your shoulder. Pigs, 3 different ones. Sheep and Pigs on the Wing Part 2. Somewhere safe to bury my bone. Of course, each tells its own twisted tale. Although Pigs on the Wing Parts 1 and 2 do add a bright spot as they formed a love song to Roger's new wife, Carolyn Christie. You know that I care. So let me pause for a moment to recognize our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses I always wear. So right now you can choose from a variety of different frames to fit your needs, from readers to migraine relief glasses to transition lenses to blue blocks to protect your eyes from digital blue light. And you can shop by frame size and color and design, and you can design your own pair. And you can get up to 80% off regular retail prices by clicking on the info button right up here. It's our special POR price. Check that out. But as dark as Animals, the record, was overall, it was well received. In fact, it dominated the charts back in the day. It went to number 2 on their home turf in the UK. Here in the States, Animals went to number 3 and it certified platinum less than 2 months after its release. Ultimately, it would reach quadruple platinum status in 95, and then elsewhere it reached number 12 in Canada. It went to number 9 in Finland, number 3 in Sweden and Australia, number 2 in Norway and Austria, and number 1 in Spain, Germany, Italy, and also New Zealand. Now, arguably the centerpiece of Animals, Dogs, as I mentioned earlier, that originated from You Gotta Be Crazy, which you gotta be crazy not to love this album, this track. It's incredible. I mean, joking aside, Dogs is 17 minutes of pure Pink Floyd excellence. David Gilmour's solo guitar work alone is to die for. And his presence on this track, awe-inspired. Dogs also contains David's only lead vocal on this album, in which juxtaposed with his guitar playing offers a stunning counterpoint to Roger's fittingly inhuman lyrics.
You'll reap the harvest you have sown.
Now, Dogs opens with a vicious depiction of an opportunistic class of people. These dogs are, of course, cutthroat. They are mercenaries on the hunt for victims waiting in the wings.
To pick out the easy meat with your eyes closed.
Ever ready to pick out the easy meat and strike when the moment is right without thinking.
Moment is right without thinking.
Now, according to Roger Waters, they actively work on points for style. So this isn't just animal instinct we're talking about here. This is a sadistic game they're playing. These dogs lie to those who trust them, and when these trustees turn their backs, they put the knife in. It's really chilling. I don't think the expression, "it's a dog-eat-dog world," has ever been more appropriate than here.
Get the chance to put the knife in.
But verse 2 gives us a look into the fate of these social predators, giving us and them a warning and a glimpse into the hell that awaits them. You got to keep one eye looking over your shoulder. It's going to get harder, harder and harder.
It's gonna get harder, harder, harder.
And by the time they get older, yeah, maybe they've struck it rich, but it's a cheap substitute for having lived a dishonorable life, hiding their heads in the sand all alone and dying of cancer. Each becomes just another sad old man. Like they say, you can't take it with you when you die.
Just another sad old man.
What do they have to show for their lives? Just a dark and twisted heart, really. Speaking of dark and twisted, Roger Waters' worldview, as I mentioned earlier, it was not a perspective David Gilmour shared, and yet he performs his role on this track so well. Hearing his extended delivery on the line, all alone and dying of cancer, you almost feel pity for these wretched souls. And after all this, we're only 3 minutes into the song. I mean, come on, can it get any more epic? Yes, it can. And this is Pink Floyd we're talking about after all. Dogs just does not let up. At this point, we enter into an extended interlude containing more of David's par excellence guitar work. And this track has infused so many great breakaway instrumental moments, which simultaneously let us revel in the song's sheer sonic beauty and recover Waters' violent and biting tooth and nail lyrics. Coming back into verse 3, we get an echo of what we've just heard in verse 2. More insight into the ill-begotten fate of the dogs. Gilmour sings some chilling lines about reaping harvest, growing fear, and bad blood that turns to stone. Closing out the verse, we get some New Testament millstone imagery. So have a good drown as you go down all alone, dragged down by the stone. Those last words were captured on a tape loop and then repeated until they faded into a dying howl, which then fades to silence, provoking images of sinking deep into the watery abyss. The track then transitions into the strange sounds of distant dogs barking and howling and a few eerie minutes of synthesized ear candy. at a little over 12 minutes into the track, it's now Roger Waters' turn to man the mic. His strangled and high-pitched voice picks up the scathing narrative from there, preaching that everyone's expendable and that no one has real friends.
I'm a little bit confused.
Then after breaking for another insanely heroic Gilmour guitar solo, Waters takes us home with what some have called an Allen Ginsberg-inspired outro. Once again describing the lives of these dogs in uncompromising terms. He sings, "Who was born in a house full of pain? Who was told what to do by the man? And who was fitted with a collar and chain?" Perhaps leading us to wonder, are the dogs even at fault for their heinous acts? Or are they victims of society as well? Closing things out, Waters returns to the image of a dog drowning in the depths, dragged down by the stone. It's bleak for a bleak song. Commenting on the outro, Waters said, "That round at the end of Dogs is, I think, very powerful and quite chilling. Dragged down by the stone is the last line of it. He was told what to do by the man. It's a bitter reclamation against authoritarianism and against what I perceived when I was growing up." So there you go. Roger Waters on the human condition told through the guise of dogs. Is it pessimistic? Is it dark? Maybe painted a little too black? Yeah, for sure. But it's also a thought-provoking piece of art. This song is just so incredible. Okay, so switching gears here, it's not exactly surprising, but Dogs, it's had almost no media placements over the years. I mean, you figure there aren't too many 17-minute prog rock epics making waves in popular culture. Not right now. That being said, I did find one humorous placement in an episode of WKRP Cincinnati back in '78. Basically, the scene has disc jockey Johnny Fever playing the track so he can eat up enough airtime to take a 17-minute nap in his studio. Brilliant play here, which word on the street is that many DJs on FM radio stations pulled the same shenanigan. Some did it to take a nap, and some did it to take a smoke break, and Dogs was the perfect song for that.
Don't touch that.
As far as cover versions of Dogs go, those two are nearly non-existent. And I guess if you count the never-ending list of Pink Floyd tribute bands who have done it, sure, this song has probably been done to death in that aspect. So there's another animal connected to this album that I haven't talked about yet. It's the elephant in the room, so to speak. Animals, in a very real sense, was the beginning of the end for Pink Floyd's classic lineup. This was the album that set the great Floydian fracture into motion. And because Rick Wright was the first casualty, I'm going to give him the podium for just a minute. Rick would say that Animals was the first album that he didn't write anything for. It was also the album where the group began losing its unity. And why was that? Well, Wright pointed his finger directly at one Roger Waters. He said, and I quote, "This was when Roger really started to believe that he was the sole writer for this band. He believed that it was him only, because of him, that the band was still going. And obviously, when he started to develop his ego trips, the person he would have his conflicts with would be me," end of quote. No doubt about it. Roger Waters, like I said, lyrical genius. And I don't like to be critical, but Rick wasn't exaggerating here at all. Rogers would assert himself as the do-everything guy for the album. He wrote all the lyrics, he composed 4 out of the 5 tracks, he performed most of the vocals. He kind of left his bandmates on the outside looking in. And from where they were standing, they saw a coup to take over the band. Wright continued, he said, "I think Roger was deciding, I'm going to be the writer of Pink Floyd. I'm going to write everything. These guys they're going to be the musicians to play my stuff. If you're thinking like that, you're going to reject things. It's very sad. That's the way it happened." This emerging modus operandi marked the inevitable decline for this foursome. As Nick Mason recalled, Roger was in full flow with the ideas, but he was really keeping David Gilmour down and frustrating him deliberately. Part of David's frustration was over how the royalties were divvied up for this. Of course, allocated per song. And for Animals, Gilmour he had just a single co-writing credit on Dogs. So he was understandably irritated when at the 11th hour, Waters slipped a short 3-minute track into the mix, Pigs on the Wing, a song that he then split in half to bookend the album. Not only did this give Roger, 2 additional royalty credits, it further diluted Gilmour's payouts.
From Pigs on the Wing.
Dogs, it was by far the album's longest track, taking up the bulk of the first side of 17 minutes. Gilmour protested that it deserved to count for more than the 2 brief halves of Pigs on the Wing. I'm sure you can guess how Waters responded to that. According to Mason, it was these kinds of issues that drove a wedge between David Gilmour and Roger Waters. And of course, the conflicts that began during the making of Animals led to Rick Wright's departure during the Wall era. And it created far-reaching fissures in the edifice of one of the world's greatest rock and roll bands. The beginning of the long end. Of course, we've covered the sequence of what happened next in our other Pink Floyd episodes. The infighting and the bitter war of words that accompanied the making of The Wall and the final cut and a momentary lapse of reason. Pink Floyd generated enough acrimony during these years to last for decades to come. Sadly, that's exactly what happened. But despite all the burgeoning turmoil connected to Animals, the album has continued to hold a rarefied, even reverential place in the history of rock. And it continues to keep giving so many years later. For example, in 2018, Pink Floyd released a remixed version of Dogs. And in 2020, Waters pushed for the release of a remixed and remastered vinyl of Animals. As usual, David Gilmour and Roger Waters butted heads over this, as they do with just about everything, and everything related to the band in general. But the album finally did drop in 2022, and this updated version, it climbed to number 21 on the Billboard 200. Also went to number 27 in Australia, number 20 in Denmark, number 16 in Spain, 11 in Belgium, 10 in Poland, 5 in Switzerland and Hungary, number 3 in Scotland, and it went to number 1 in Portugal. Now, going back to the divide that was growing between Roger Waters and his bandmates, Waters believing he should be the one and only voice of Pink Floyd, it seems to be hidden in the lyrics of Dogs. Deaf, dumb, and blind, you just keep on pretending that everyone's expendable and no one has a real friend. The perfect transitional lyric of the concept of Animals to The Wall, to the end of the incomparable Pink Floyd. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Pink Floyd, Animals, and Dogs. Such a great track. What are your memories of this album and the song? What do you think about Roger Waters versus David Gilmour, the end of Pink Floyd, and this time in Pink Floyd? What other tracks should we cover from Animals? Should we spend more time on it? Let us know in the comments. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe below. We'd love to have you. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.